Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Heart Of. Today's episode is going to be about video games and empathy, and I can already kind of hear the question, what do video games have to do with empathy? Well, everything, really, depending on the game. So, what makes video games in such a great place to talk about empathy is the idea that you're doing these actions. So, even before I get into that, let's back up. What makes a movie good? Like, what really shows that a movie is hitting its point? The idea is show, don't tell. How are you going to feel what the movie wants you to feel? The movie is showing you why you should feel those things. It's not telling you should feel those things. So, a great example is instead of a movie telling you should feel bad for character A, it shows you why you should feel bad for character A. So, for example, in the movie Garden State, the main character, Andrew Large, played by Zach Braff, is incredibly numb. You see him on these medications. It's showing you. It doesn't just tell you, like, hey, he's on these medications. It shows you why he is the way he is and why you should empathize with him. Compared to, let's say, something like Shang-Chi, which has a monologue of, this happened to me, then that happened to me, then that happened to me, then that happened to me. So your movie's telling you should feel for this character because we're telling you this is why. And both are good movies, but the idea that you got to an emotional, empathetic place because the movie showed you versus what the movie told you. Now, the difference between video games is do, don't show. So, a lot of these games do and not show. What do I mean by that? So show would be like a cutscene, or the game just telling you, or just reading like in audio logs, or reading in logs, or hearing in audio logs that this character had a rough life, or this or that happened. And sometimes that can be effective if you're just trying to set a mood and an atmosphere. But most of the time, you have to do, not show. So, a lot of these games I'm going to talk about is do, don't show. Okay, now that I have that out of the way, we're going to talk about our first game now. So, the first game we're going to talk about is Papers, Please. Now, Papers, Please takes place in the 80s. You're in this stand-in for the Soviet Union or communist country, and you play a passport documentation officer. And literally your job is to stamp passports and let certain people in. And the state gives you directive to let certain people in or not let certain people in. And you might be thinking, well, Michael, what does that have to do with empathy? Well, think about it this way. No one who is a bad person is bad overnight. No one wakes up and thinks, I'm going to be a bad guy. I'm going to do some bad guy things. I'm going to do some bad girl things. So the state in the game gives you incentives, like you can't let these people in, you can't let that person in. If the passport looks like this, you can't stamp that. And I remember trying to play the game like a little rebel. Like, I'm letting everybody in. I'm letting people need to live. But you have a family you have to take care of. So you let 5 people, the wrong people in, that deducts from your pay. You don't get to work that day. You lose this, you lose that, and they start to take these incentives from you. But when you start to follow the programming, you get a little bonus, you get a little extra, and then you're able to live and you're able to provide for your family. And this idea that no one who is evil overnight. You know, it's not just that a person is making these individual decisions. It's deeply imposed in this systemic issues down to the root. So it's not just that this one passport person you're playing as decides, wow, I need this money. It's the fact that this whole system has been designed and set up from the ground up to promote, push for, and give you this. So you're pushed in this kind of behavior. Now, I'm playing this game. I have this whole this whole time to think about it, but in the moment, if this is a real life, if this is a reality, yeah. And you might think, Michael, it's the 80s, the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, but to think about like any sort of government agency, even to like the most non-intense government agency, think like the DMV. The idea that like these people have been beaten down by this job, by this system, and maybe at one point they cared, but because of the system, they can't care anymore. It's not that they don't want to care, it's just that a system will literally not allow you to, or it put you in a position where you've been beaten into submission, where you lost that functionality. Think like social services. There's a great episode of The Wire, where The Wire is a crime-based show taking place in Baltimore, where this cop tries to adopt a kid, but again, the social systems that were put in place and the people that run them made it impossible for him to adopt this child. And then that child had to go to a group home. But maybe at one point, the woman who ran it wasn't like that. But again, the systemic issues put that in place where eventually she was going to act like this. So something like Paper Please puts you in that position where maybe in the beginning of the game, you're more likely to help people than you are to not help people. Because by the end, by all these incentives, by getting punished, you quickly realize that you have to be something you never wanted to be, and that the system is enforcing this. And it's not about putting a person first, it's about putting the state first. So that's the game Paper Please. The next game I'm going to talk about is called That Dragon Cancer. Now, before I even talk about this game, maybe like 2 of the games I'm going to talk about are like fun, or like have fun qualities to them, but not, when people think video game, they think like, oh boy, it's gonna be a grand old time, I'm gonna have a good time. It's like any other artistic medium. Not every game is meant to have a good time. Sometimes it's made to make a point and to give you an experience. Experience is the key word, not necessarily fun. Experience and engagement. You don't go to every movie thinking you're going to have a blast. You don't watch Schindler's List to have a blast. You don't watch, Apocalypse Now to have a blast. You watch it to have an experience, to empathize and understand, what people go through. So, that out of the way, let me continue with That Dragon Cancer. So That Dragon Cancer is literally, you play as a family, and their small infant child is going through cancer, and it goes into remission, and then it comes back, and then the child passes away. It's literally dealing with the grieving process of a family dealing with losing a loved one, especially a very young loved one that has cancer, and how the engagement, how the play comes in is just these very symbolic mini games that show what it's like. There's this moment where the parents and the doctors are in the operating room, and you're playing as the child, and he has the this toy that when you the arrow points to something, goes, the cow goes moo. But you see the room start to slowly fill up with metaphorical water, and when you press it, the arrows point to people now, and it's their inner thoughts of what's going on. It's their panic, it's their turmoil, it's their feeling of not being able to control anything. And I feel like I don't need to truly explain why this is empathetic, but the people who made this game had to deal with this in their own personal life, and they made it so people who were also dealing with this could reach out and feel like they've been seen. So the game is called That Dragon Cancer. It's a very tough game to get through. It's not something you can beat in a single sitting. It's something where you take it bit by bit and really take it in. The next game is called Vemba. Vemba is something I wanted to talk about for a while, but now with the games about empathy, I feel like this is the perfect place to do so. You Play is a Indian woman in Canada who is starting a family with her husband, and they're freshly immigrated from India. They haven't fully adapted to the culture. The husband's struggling to find work, and you give birth to this son named Calvin, and a lot of the game is like making food, traditional Indian food, and this idea of you're trying to hold on to your culture with both hands. And the son is trying to embed himself in Canadian culture, and he's like torn between two worlds, and he doesn't know what it's like to live as a Canadian but also as an Indian, and he finds himself frustrated living as an Indian because the world around him isn't that like that. It's not like that at all. And I was able to connect and empathize with Calvin so much so, because as a young Lebanese child, growing up in the shadow of 9/11 and just with Arab hatred at that point, and just not being, my world wasn't like that. I've been the only Lebanese person for a lot of everything. School, work, it sucks, honestly. So you start to think like, I can't bring my culturalness anywhere because I'm the only one. I don't think anyone really cares to hear about it. And it's not really since, college where it's been seen, not even the beginning of college, but like mid-college, it's been seen as an asset. So, and a lot of it's internalized, and you get this cultural imposter syndrome, this idea of like, who am I to talk about it because I denied it as a child? And Calvin in the game goes through a lot of that, of like, who am I to talk about this later on in his adult life when he's forced to speak on his Indian heritage. But because as a child he struggled with it so much that it's difficult. And going back to Do, Don't, Show, you see that with his relationship with his mom. So the mom makes him food, in traditional Indian food, and you painstakingly make this food just for Calvin saying, I'm all set, don't worry about it. And this idea that he, and I quote, don't want to be the stinking Indian child. I don't want to be looked at this way. And, or, setting up a dinner night and Calvin's like, I'm caught up with work, and you do these things as the mom. And then as Calvin, you do these things, try to make these foods, and not understanding where you came from. Because, again, this idea of this cultural imposter syndrome. And what's interesting, it has a very lovely ending. I don't want to spoil it because it's absolutely worth playing. It's a great game. So, this is one of the few that's like, okay, this has a happy place. But empathize with... I can empathize with Calvin, but I can also be empathetic with the mom that's just trying to hold on to her culture. I can empathize with the dad who's just trying to provide for his family in a country where he doesn't quite understand the rules in places and the language, and immigrant families that come just trying to make a better life and are struggling, and how to adapt and how do you switch. My dad came to America in 1973, and he's a great man who came, figured things out, but not everyone can figure things out like that. Not everyone has a guiding hand. So, you empathize with a person. And when you look at someone struggling or having a hard time speaking English, you have to understand that they came here to make things better. And that can be hard to adapt and hold on to what you held dear, because everything in your life has to change. So, Vemba, great game, great looking at what it's like when people immigrate, but also the children of those immigrants, to see what it's like when you straddle two worlds. Now, my parents weren't. My dad immigrated here. My mom lived here all her life, and I was adopted. So technically, I immigrated. So it doesn't neatly apply to me, but there's so much of it that I can truly pick from and deeply connect with. So that's Bemba. The next game is called This War of Mine. This is, now let's go back to the game that's not necessarily fun. So it's another game that takes place in like a Soviet country. It's in the 80s, and there's a civil war going on. And you play civilians. Now, normally in war games, you play soldiers, and you have power, and you have the power of defense, but you play as 3 civilians, and you're in this raggedy house, and you're trying to build up this house, and you have to make these moment-to-moment decisions, and the decisions you make decide whether your characters are happy, depressed, suicidal. So, for example, you go to houses and you try to pick over houses, empty houses, for supplies. One of your people in the house is sick. That can happen. What do? So you find a house, and there's old people living in it. Well, they need the medicine. Do you take all the medicine? Do you leave half the medicine? Do you not take any of the medicine? Let's say you take all the medicine. You come back and you're like, don't ask me how I got this, but you have this. Or do you don't take the medicine and then your friend dies? Those are the situations. And this isn't far-fetched. This is like war zones, what people have to go through. You're in a supermarket. You see a woman being assaulted. Do you step in? Do you fight this soldier? Do you save this person? Or do you go about your business? Do you like, oh, this is a good distraction for me. I need to get food for myself. I can't get shot because I need to bring this stuff home. I have people at home that need to live. I have kids. I have women. I have my fellow men. I need to get supplies back to my tribe. So, let the record show though, in that part I did, let's say you save her. You feel great. And if it works out, that's awesome. But things can always take a turn of events. So you're forced to make these really hard choices in this war of mine, and empathize with there's like a point when I was playing when I just had to stop and be like, oh man, this is what people go through, and I had to lay down for a bit of a cuddle. It's a great game, but again, just like that Dragon Cancer, just like that Papers, Please, it's an experience. It's not something you play for. It's not Skyrim. It's not a fantasy. You're playing this for an experience to understand and empathize with the other. That people are struggling, and you can see it in the news today. With all these conflicts everywhere. So that This War of Mine. And then the last game I'm going to talk about is Metal Gear Solid 3. I know I talked about Metal Gear Solid last time, but in Metal Gear Solid 3, there is a level and a boss fight with someone called the Sorrow. And essentially through the whole game, it's an action game. You're killing people, trying to get to your objective, and the game forces you to look at the people you killed, and it forces you to hear what they're thinking. And the idea that's like, you have to really take a look at your violent actions, and did I make the right choice? Did I not make the right choice? Did I push things too far? And the idea of empathy in this one is sometimes you have to reflectively look at your own actions. So, did I make the right choice? Did I do the right thing? And sometimes you don't always have to face it, but in this time, they're forcing you to face it. So, I know this one's a little shorter, but it was an interesting thought, and I wanted to kind of add it, almost like a little cliff note. So that is video games and empathy. I hope you found this interesting. It was definitely interesting to play these games, and definitely walk away with a new experience, and just on how video game narratives are told. And again, video games are not always fun. They can be this heart-wrenching experience. So, hope you have a good day. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode.